Hey, Jordan, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, man. It's good to see you again.
And for anyone who doesn't know you, I always like to ask, who do you say you are?
Oh man, it's starting with the hard questions. I almost just sort of leave this element out of the show's called the Jordan Harbinger Show, the podcast that I host. So
Mhm.
I'm almost like, do I need to explain more about what this is? But yeah, I interview brilliant people and I make their wisdom available to anyone and to everyone for that matter. And then on Fridays we give advice, Sundays we do science. So my mission, I guess, is to help people become better informed, more critical thinkers because we are drowning in misinformation, disinformation, poor, poorly marketed products, deceptive advertising. I mean, we are just drowning in that stuff, and I think you can tell people what to think, but
Mhm.
people won't listen to you. But if you teach people how to think, they
Mhm.
will come to better conclusions. They'll vote better. They'll be better citizens of the country that they live in. They'll be better consumers of information. It's just we're not going to get through this sort of cloud of AI and bad actors without becoming smarter and sharper. So that's the boulder that I'm pushing uphill
Mhm.
constantly. That's me swimming upstream. Choose your metaphor here. Pissing into the wind. That's me pissing into the wind.
I guess what's interesting about that is like, how did you land on that of all things to be like, like I could really be of use helping people get this thing. Maybe it's not that hard to do if you really think about it and if you have like
Mhm.
a framework to work through, but this is something that would be worthwhile doing.
Yeah, I think for me, it was a confluence of factors. So I started to see really smart friends of mine. I went to law school. I used to be an attorney, and I saw really smart, well-educated people believe and say and spread really dumb, easily debunked urban legends or rumors, or people who are struggling with their weight telling me, oh, I need to do this and this and this. And I'm like, no, you need diet and exercise. And they're like, well, this
Mhm.
influencer online that I follow said, I'm like, he's selling you things,
Right,
you
right.
know? So I just saw how much damage misinformation and disinformation was doing and bad deceptive marketing was doing to otherwise educated and smart people.
Mm.
And then I started working with people who were in prison, incarcerated, or people who grew up with no money and are currently growing up with no money. And I was like, okay, so if somebody who's a lawyer who grew up with a silver spoon in their ass believes all this stuff, what is this person who's not educated, doesn't have access to a bunch of resources, isn't surrounded by other well-educated people? What is this person facing? And it's an epidemic of just absolutely wild proportions. And so I started to see people get scammed by things like multi-level marketing and like
Mm.
online scams. And I just thought, okay, I can't warn people against every single one of these events. What I need to do is teach people how to think critically and
Mm.
be smarter. And then they can avoid these things. And then they can help their family avoid these things too. So a lot of my time on the Jordan Harbinger show is dedicated to exposing bad thinking, exposing scams, teaching people how things work, busting open urban legends or things that are not true, and kind of exposing the truth and
Mhm.
in debunking conspiracy theories, whatever it might be. That stuff has been really helpful because we're surrounded by that, and smart people who should know better are still falling prey to this. I fielded a letter earlier this week
Mhm.
from somebody who had said their father was is a surgeon. He's like a neurosurgeon, right? This is a guy who
Mhm.
cuts people's heads open and operates on their brain, and he believes also that he can make money reselling toilet paper through Amway. And the dude's lost like 100 grand, and I'm like, how is this genius person, this
Right.
guy who you will let cut your brain open and work on it? This guy is falling for the dumbest, most like just the silliest of marketing ploys that
Yeah.
somebody who's in college or high school could potentially see through.
Mm.
How is this happening? And so I realized it's not just dumb people that have bad thinking. It's
Right.
everyone, right? It's a completely different set of brain circuitry that's
Mm.
being used here.
I guess have you been more surprised of how easily people are able to pick up what it is that you're giving them, or like people being easily misinformed regardless of like how smart you are or wherever you fall on the intellectual scale,
Yeah,
so to
what
speak?
what I've found actually is that it doesn't take much to show someone who is reasonably intelligent how to think better.
Hmm.
Most of us, we don't think to question things that come our way, right? So we don't think. Let me give an example here. if someone says, hey, vaccines cause autism, it's like, oh my God, I heard that vaccines cause autism. And it's like, well, wait, where did that come from? And then you
Mhm.
start to question sources and show like why this might be true or this might not be true. And you get people who go, I never even thought to question this. I just saw somebody who was in a position of authority say this, and so I believed it.
Right.
And you go, okay, well, now that you know how to trace sources, now they do it with everything. And it's
Mhm.
great. It's great to see that because you see these people who've never thought, oh, maybe there's misinformation out there. Maybe this person is trying to trick me into something. And this is an example that's fraught with, you're going to get emails about this, but that's fine. But I was the same way. I would
Mhm.
say something like, oh, you know what? I heard XYZ something, something, something. And my friends would go, oh, yeah, I heard that too. And then I had one friend who goes, let me stop you right there. I'm
Mhm.
a materials scientist, and that is definitely not true. And I don't know where you heard that, but that is definitely not true. And let me tell you why. And then I
Mhm.
realized, oh, I'm just spreading disinformation and misinformation, I should say, as well.
Mhm.
I'm part of the problem, and most of us are. So it's really easy to get somebody who is willing to think critically to actually do it. It's almost like instead of an instruction manual on how to do it, they just need a reminder that they should be doing it.
Mhm.
If you hear something that is absolutely bananas, check the source,
Right.
right? Check the source and see if it is something that should be spread or if you are just spreading misinformation. It could be harmless like an urban legend, but
Mhm.
it could also be harmful like, oh, make sure you don't get this vaccine for your children because it could cause autism. And it's like, now your kid has measles. Good
Mhm.
job. You know?
Right. Right.
So
I guess.
so that kind of stuff, I am passionate about that stuff because the consequences are dire, right? It's
Right.
not
Right.
just like, can you believe this guy thinks the earth is flat? What an
Mhm.
idiot. It's like, okay, well, now this person didn't vaccinate their babies and they have lifelong injuries as a result. That's terrible.
Got you. I get. I guess. Do you think there's room for nuance, so to speak? Because sometimes it feels like we kind of default to being lazy once it's you get through some of the hard stuff and you're like, okay, I worked hard. I want to come back home and just like put my feet up. And I,
Sure.
I guess there, like, how do you compartmentalize the space for intellectual thinking and just like maybe turn your brain off and you're like,
Sure.
duh, like, let me just watch some jokes or something.
Look, I'm all for watching comedy on Netflix like the rest of us. But yes, there's room for nuance, of course. In fact, one of the ways you can tell disinformation, or especially disinformation, not just misinformation,
Hmm.
is by the lack of nuance.
Hmm.
So things that are really easy to believe, like misinformation or disinformation. The reason I say both of those things, misinformation is I go, hey man, do you know the Earth is flat? And you go, Jordan, let me explain to you why the Earth isn't flat. And I go,
Hmm.
oh man, maybe you're right. Sorry, I don't know why I thought that. Maybe my education is from the 1600s.
Hmm.
Fine. But disinformation is vaccines cause autism. The reason that that's disinformation is the person spreading that, who
Hmm.
I should say the original person who spread that, knows that that is not true,
Hmm.
right? But they did it because they got paid to do it, and this is well documented. The person who's telling you that vaccines cause autism
Hmm.
probably doesn't realize they are spreading disinformation because they're
Hmm.
not a bad person. They're actually trying to help you. They're just
Right.
not. They're doing it wrong. So when you say vaccines can sometimes hurt people, that is true. That's nuanced. The
Hmm.
truth is, most of the time that does not happen.
Hmm.
Right, and so you have to play the odds, unfortunately, right?
Right.
But if 1 in a million people have this side effect from vaccines, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get vaccinated because you're probably going to have a much more severe reaction from the actual disease that you
Hmm.
could get. That's sort of the example that I give here. But disinformation is devoid of nuance, right? It's this will happen or this happens when you do this.
Right.
That's almost never the case with science, right? It's and so that's why you see disinformation is so successful is it's easy to believe because there's no nuance. So you
Right.
can tell somebody with like 3 firing neurons only that this, did you know that there's bioweapons labs sponsored by the Democrats in Ukraine? And it's like, oh my gosh,
Hmm.
herder, that's incredible, right?
Right.
Like that's easy to believe for even the dumbest person. In fact, mostly only the dumbest people,
Hmm.
because it's just simple.
Yeah.
But if you go through all the nuance of like how something comes about or like how some cases are this and some cases aren't that, and but it
Hmm.
depends on the population and this, that you lose all the dumb folks.
Right.
Disinformation wants to recruit everyone, so it's by design really easy to understand and believe. And when things are easy to understand, they're easy to spread.
Hmm.
You can take an uninformed voter for example, and you can tell them something really simple and they'll
Mm,
remember it because it's really simple. But if you
right.
say, actually, here's an economic policy that's really complicated, you
Mm,
lose a ton of people. And then you lose even more who are like, I can't be bothered to explain this to my crazy Uncle Frank. He's just going to believe whatever so and so candidate
right.
says,
Right.
anyways. So it's kind of a losing battle. There's an expression, the lie is halfway around the world while the truth is getting its shoes on.
Mm,
And so that's really why it's so hard to counteract this stuff. And yes, that's why when you come home and you're just putting your feet up, maybe that's not the time to take on a worldview. Maybe
mm.
that is the time to watch Netflix and watch Jake Paul beat Mike Tyson somehow. Like maybe, like, what the hell is that?
Right.
Oh, uh-oh, I lost my audio. Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Gotcha. I still
Yeah,
got you.
yeah, my headphones came unplugged for some
Oh,
reason.
gotcha.
Um, Good thing you edit these. So that's why I'm all for relaxing, but that
Mm,
is not the time to take on a worldview. But that's another reason why social media is such a disinformation spreading engine.
mm.
Is you're on the toilet, you're tired, you're flipping through something, and suddenly it's like the Earth is flat, and you're like, I don't know, my favorite comedian's saying that that's true. Maybe that's a thing. Maybe I should look into that. And
Yeah.
you smoke a J, and now you've got a different worldview 3 hours later, right? And it's like, maybe this is not the time to change your perspective on physics,
Right.
right? Like, maybe this is a time to just watch Joe Rogan and not believe everything that whatever this guy is, the guest today says. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's just entertainment today.
It's it's funny because it's like sometimes do you think there's a point in time where the lines got blurred to where it's like, okay, this is what's understood to be true versus this is like there you think there's always been like a like disinformation, misinformation. It's not just like a new social media thing. It's like it's
Right.
always been a thing. Like maybe now it's more transparent, or maybe now it's just seen in a different light to where like if you're on Instagram, you're like, okay, hey, like I want to start a business. This is how a business page is done. Oh, there's
Mm-hmm.
like sponsorship or there's this or there's that. Like somebody may just be like, oh, hey, this person who just popped up into my feed and they told me exactly what I wanted to know. But then
Right.
being on the other side, you're like, well, no, that's target marketing. It's like
Right.
there's a positive of it where someone can bring you the information that you might need because you fit this specific demographic based on the information you provided. But then there's the other part where it's like, yeah, people that can scam you, kind of targeting you in the same type of way.
Yeah, some of this is just straight up media literacy, right?
Mm.
They'll go. I have a friend, and she's great. She's not dumb at all.
Mm.
She's a successful real estate developer, and she says things like, "I can't believe it. The universe is just listening to me because I was just searching for. I don't even remember. It was something like relaxation techniques and a vacation in Turkey where she can like get some space or think through some big problems in her life."
Mhm.
And then she's like, and then I went on Instagram and it was like 10 things to do in Turkey if you just want to relax. And she's like, the universe is talking to me. And I'm like,
Mm.
no, rather than the universe talking to you, your phone is listening to you. It's very similar, but it's not the same thing. Like, of course, it is absolutely no surprise that when you search for something in Google, it shows up on Amazon later or it
Right,
shows up on Instagram later. That's a media literacy thing. And she's a little
right.
bit older, so she really had no idea that something she searches for in Chrome ends up being, retargeting her in
Mm.
other areas, social media, Facebook, whatever it is. And it's not a coincidence, right? But she thinks it's a coincidence due to cognitive bias and poor media literacy. So
Mm.
now she goes, well, this is the universe telling me that I do need to go to Turkey. And I'm like, no, it's Turkish Airlines telling you that you need to go to Turkey. There's a big difference
Right, right.
between, the gods telling you that you need to go to Turkey and Turkish Airlines using retargeting in their advertising budget. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
That makes sense. And um, what's funny about that, and the thing I feel like we're kind of circling is that it's all in the stories we tell ourselves that are in the stories
Yes.
that are told to us because it's like the things that stick are effective stories, whether it's like we're coming off of the heels of like an election or like where you have sound bites or things that are sold, whether they're headlines, where it's like, okay, hey,
Mm-hmm.
this is something that's easy for me to grasp. But then in what you do, it's something that's like taking something that may be daunting where it's like, oh, this is controversial, or like I thought they were on the up and up, like Amway or MLL or things that are like you have other opportunities or you can build relationships with the people that you meet. Like people aren't just like their business cards or like
Hmm.
exchanges. Like if you make a genuine effort to know someone, they can reciprocate that. And actually having someone take the time to walk you through that, it's like, okay, hey, I could learn all the bad things, but I could also learn something that's useful to me. And getting that information from someone that's coherent in what they're saying, I think that's a pretty that's been a good story for me to kind of like grasp onto, like from you and from the other Jordans, where it's like, okay, like the way you go about emphasizing certain things and breaking it down and actually giving it time and attention to be like, okay, I'm not going to come out and call my audience like dum-dums. Like, it's like, you're
Hmm.
not dumb. Like, I think you can understand this. And it's like, oh, I think you're right. I think I do get what you're putting down.
Yeah, yeah. I try to always respect the intelligence of my audience. You know, even when it comes to sponsorships on the show, I won't advertise things that I think are bad for them or that I don't use or that I wouldn't use. And also, yeah, when I'm talking to my audience, I try not to talk to them like they're a bunch of dumb kids. They're not.
Mm,
They're Many of them, I'm sure, are much, much more intelligent than I am. I just happen to be talking to that particular expert at that particular time after reading their particular book. And so I think that that's why the medicine goes down a little bit better, because
mm.
people aren't looking at me like, "Hey, you dummy, you really think the Earth is flat?" I mean, okay, those people might need a few more brain cells, but if I'm really talking about somebody, if I'm really talking about something like a scam or something that's out there that's nuanced, you know,
Mm,
it's not you're not dumb for not knowing that. You might be a literal brain surgeon. It's just that you're not terminally online like my producers and I are. So you
mm,
don't know about those particular things, and that's fine. That's how it's supposed to be. You know, that's my role in educating people, and so I try to respect every minute of the audience's time doing that. The internet is great for learning. I mean, my kids,
mm,
you know, there's this whole debate about screen time, like you shouldn't let your kids see screens and da da da. I don't know, man. There's no really good scientific research on screen time. There's
mm,
very little, I should say, not none. There's very little. Two, my kids say things and I go, "Where did you learn that?" "Oh,
mm,
YouTube." And it's not like a dumb thing that they learned. They learned all kinds of stuff about how the planets revolve around the sun and the solar system and why some are colder than others. And they're
mm,
5 and 2. And
mm.
I'm like, "How do you know that?" And they're like, "YouTube."
Yeah.
So they're learning a ridiculous amount of things on YouTube. Unfortunately, they're also learning about consumerism and other crap. They're like, "I want this plastic thing." It's like, no. Right. So, of course, I bought YouTube Premium for my kids so they don't see ads. But
Mm,
basically, a lot of the videos themselves are just ads for like whatever toy the kids are playing with. So
right.
this whole thing is double sided and is a double edged sword and double sided. But I don't think it's all bad, you know, and I like to think I'm adding to the signal on the internet instead of
Mm,
just the noise by what we do on the Jordan Harbinger show.
mm,
But you have to be really conscious about that process. Just like you as a user of the internet have to be conscious about what you consume. Generally, anything on social media is advertising
right.
or junk. So when people are learning a lot from clips on TikTok, I would question what they are learning or what they think they're learning,
Mm,
because that is generally just content designed to be viral. That's
yeah.
one of the reasons why I like long format stuff like podcasting.
Mm.
You and I could talk for 2 or 3 hours about something. This show's not 3 hours. Don't worry, people. We could talk for 2 or 3 hours about something, and we could really unpack the entire topic and go through a book that's 500 pages long and get most slash all of the main points
Mm,
down in a show. If we're doing a TikTok video, I have to be like 3 weird tricks about the solar system scientists hate, you
yeah.
know, and it's like, what are you learning? Oh, nothing. I'm just making a provocative title with a stupid thumbnail so people sit through this 20-second video
Yeah.
and then scroll through the other ones because that's how I get paid. Podcasting is totally different, right? We
Yeah.
are concerned with making really good long form content that keeps people coming back for hundreds of hours.
Mm.
That's a totally different game than trying to get somebody to click on something on an app while they're, you know, taking a leak.
Right, right. And I guess to your point, it's like I'm always encouraged by people and kind of where things go, even if they're coming off of the heels of a Tyson Jake Paul fight.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where it's like, hey, there is there's like the spectacle, but then there's also like the real life that's lived afterwards. And it's that like in order to like affect a change, say in myself, or like to see different outcomes into what I'm going through or what I'm looking forward to, it's like, okay, hey, like everything, every problem or every situation can't be approached in the same way. So sometimes it's like this might need a scalpel or this might need like just leave it alone. It's like if it's not working, like the harder I keep trying to force something, it's like sometimes time and distance works effectively. And
Hmm.
then being able to come back at a situation with a clear mind, it's like, huh, didn't think about it like that. And just being able to allow yourself the space to breathe and not to be like, I
Hmm.
have to be in the know, like I have to keep up. And I guess it also speaks to going to who it is that you are, who it is that you understand yourself to be, and kind of going from there. I think that's what you've kind of like helped me kind of point to a little bit.
I'm glad to hear that. You know, one of the you mentioned keeping up or being in the know. One of the things that I always people go, "Oh, do you listen to this? Do you watch this?" The answer is always no.
Mm,
And then they go, "Well, where do you learn things?"
mm,
Books. Why books aren't, you know? And the reason is because one, let's say I want to learn all about again, vaccines or something, right? It's like
mm,
I can look at all the social media accounts from the pro and the anti, and I can look on Twitter and I can talk to this person or that person. Well,
mm,
maybe I want a really well reasoned argument. You're not going
mm,
to get that from any of those sources generally. You're going to get hype and hyperbole. But
mm,
with a book, that person who's researching that book, that journalist or whatever, they've spent years assembling that.
mm,
So they have all the time in the world essentially to create whatever it is that they've created, and now you're reading something in like a retrospective, so it's much more complete, it's much more balanced generally,
yeah.
unless it's a book that's advocating for something,
Mm,
and you can really get a super big nice deep dive into something, especially a historical event, whatever it is.
mm,
A book is going to be way better, and you'll see how the people who are involved were thinking the whole time, how their thought process changed while they changed their mind about something, whatever it is. So that's why I prefer books. Anything that's sort of faster, like
mm,
the latest social media trend or gossip or whatever, it's almost always going to be like 90% BS, because
mm,
it doesn't matter if it's true. It just matters if it's engaging.
right.
Books are kind of the opposite, right? It's going to get just totally panned if it's full of inaccuracies,
Mm,
but it doesn't need to be full of inaccuracies because the person creating it has all the time in the world to have it checked properly.
right.
So that kind of stuff, and again, not every book is of equal quality, right? You're going to get
Right. Right.
these kooky books written by influencers too, or political candidates or whatever. But you can get really good science or really good information out of a book. You're never going to get that on a website, generally on social media, stuff like that. You know, it's so much harder, and you have to question everything. You should always be asking questions, but books are much easier and much better, higher quality place to learn. And you don't even have to read new books. Old
Mm,
books are also really good. Me and my friend Ryan Holiday, who's an author, we talk about this all the time. He's like, you don't have to read the latest books. In
yeah.
fact, maybe you should be reading books that are 1,000 years old. Those have stood the test of time. It's
Right.
true.
That's a great point because one thing I'll share this with you and try and wrap it up so I
Hmm.
don't take up too much more of your time. But one thing that I found is that anytime that I'm getting new information, it has a way of pointing me back towards old information,
For sure.
especially if it's like it's a book. One book that's kind of come up in my mind has been the How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that book always comes up
Hmm.
constantly. And it's one of those where I had to stop and ask myself, like, hey, why am I being so resistant to like going to this book? And I was like,
Hmm.
I think I feel a kind of way about like, okay, when I'm trying to win friends, am I being selfish? It's like, yeah, I think I am being selfish. I'm like, I don't really want to talk to people that much, but I want to interact and exchange with them. And it's like, okay, well, here are the steps of how you do it. And then where your ego kind of meets part of the assignment, it's like, yeah, you need to deal with this right here. Like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
thing right here you keep avoiding, you got to address this. And it's like, okay.
That's funny. Asher, I want to meet friends, but I don't really want to talk to anyone. Ah, what a dilemma.
Right.
I want to win friends and influence people, but can we do that without the people part? Because no, thank you.
Right. And then it's like, okay, so is am I even being honest about my motivation? It's
That's
like, yeah,
funny.
it sounds fun. It sounds
Except for all
engaging. And
that
it's like,
talking,
right.
except for all that friend thing, all those friends. I don't want any of those.
Yeah.
That's hilarious, man.
But
That's
it's
so
like
funny.
actually having taken the time to like make good friends and make like take the time to get to know somebody, it's like, oh
Hmm.
wow, that's you look back at time and you're like, wow, this is actually making a difference. And when I think back to
Yeah.
our last conversation and who and who you said you were. It's like becoming a dad seemed to be something that's really had an impact on you. And
Yeah,
that, yeah.
it has. Yeah, it has. You do. I know we have to go soon, but you do see your life and yourself in a completely different light when you have kids. You become in many ways the best version of yourself, but
Hmm.
also you're so vulnerable. It's a little uncomfortable, and you start questioning all these choices that you have made and that you were going to make, and all these things you thought you needed, you don't need anymore, you can't have anymore, and all these things you'd never thought of before in your life now become totally mandatory, right? You know, I got to live in this place because they have good schools, said no single guy ever, right? So, like, you know, you're like, oh, I want to live in this city because there's a bunch of hot girls. Now you're like, I got to get out of this city. There's too many hot girls.
Right, right.
You got like, I got to get out of here. Oh, man.
That's hilarious. And
Yeah.
I'll ask you this last question, as a way to look ahead and kind of look back. How do you hope to pass it forward to your kids as you have to many people around the world to say, hey, here's a tool in how you can think without getting bogged down in the nuance?
Yeah, man. I mean, I always ask my kids questions about why they believe things. Like, look, they're
Mm.
5 and 3, not even
Mhm.
3, too, actually. So if my son says, you know, this and this, or this person this and this, I say, what makes you think that? And I make them retrace their steps to how they come to conclusions, because that's really what I
Mhm.
do with adults too. Is, well, these people do this. What makes you believe that? What
Mhm.
evidence do you have for that? I do that with my kids too, because sometimes they change their mind and then they realize, oh, whenever I believe something, maybe I should question why I believe that. That's a habit that I feel like you can't start early enough.
Right.
I mean, look, my 3 year old, my almost 3 year old, probably isn't doing that. You know, she
Mhm.
just believes things she sees on YouTube, like there's unicorns in the forest. Okay, fine. You know, where did you learn that? YouTube. Is everything you see on YouTube real? No, she says. So then she realizes, huh, maybe there aren't unicorns in the forest. So it's a little bit basic with her, but with
Yeah.
my son who's 5 and a half, you know, he starts to question, well, this kid's mean. What makes you think that? Well, he played with a toy and he wouldn't share. Okay, you play with toys. Do you always share? No. Are you mean? No. Do you think that that means that you're mean because you just said he was mean for doing the same thing? Okay, well, no, he was being mean at the time. We're
Mhm.
still friends. And I'm like, aha. So you can alter the kid's thinking this certain way, right? And I think adults need to do more of that. We think it only applies to toddlers, but
Yeah.
it applies just as equally to ourselves.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Jordan. This was very much a pleasure of a conversation.
Thank you. Likewise, man. It's always fun talking with you.
Likewise. Take care.
Take care. All right.